cases continue to rise, but for now, Prime Minister Boris Johnson leaves it to us to decide how to stay safe this Christmas. With 5 days till Christmas Day and the public seeking clarity, the government leaves its options open with the cabinet split.
We will have to reserve the possibility of taking further action to protect the public and to protect public health, to protect our NHS.
But how much is the Prime Minister's message damaged by the latest revelations about Downing Street parties? We'll have the latest on the government's COVID policy as well as its political fallout, also in News at 10 tonight. The Queen is clear she cancels her Christmas plans due to COVID, but the Premier League decides to press on with its traditional Christmas fixture list. The jury prepares to consider its verdict after the prosecution rests its case in the sex abuse trial of Ghislaine Maxwell. And...
Hey, baby.
Hi, oh my God. Oh my God.
The remarkable rescue of the babies in the bath who somehow survived the Kentucky tornado.
This is ITV News at 10 with Rageh Omaar.
Good evening. Millions of people across England are tonight still wondering what plans they can and cannot make for this festive season. Despite holding a 2-hour special meeting with his cabinet this afternoon and seeing Omicron cases continue to rise, Boris Johnson could do no more than warn that new measures against the COVID variant could happen at any time, leaving many of us to wonder what exactly that means, given it's only 5 days till Christmas Day. Mr. Johnson said the data is being monitored hour by hour, but he said the government needs to know more before introducing stricter controls. So perhaps unlikely before Christmas then? But that's left many families high and dry as they desperately try to finalise their festive plans.
It was beginning to feel like Christmas, with decorations up, shopping underway and plenty of mulled wine. But hanging over it all, that looming COVID threat again. And a feeling of Groundhog Day, with no decision yet from the Prime Minister, but still no guarantees.
Unfortunately, I must say to people, we will have to reserve the possibility of taking further action to protect the public. But in the meantime, what I would say to everybody is, please exercise caution as you go about your lives.
The SAGE minutes are very clear that early intervention matters and that the earlier you intervene, the shorter the restrictions can stay in place. That means now. Why aren't you taking their advice?
We went, as you remember, Anushka, as soon as we saw what was happening with Omicron, and you will remember it was very controversial, and there were many colleagues in Parliament who said, no, this goes too far. But we went ahead with Plan B. There are still some things that we need to be clearer about before we decide to go further.
Keeping things under review may help the Prime Minister ease frustration on his own side after a cabinet minister resigned over the issue.
I couldn't support certain policies, most recently on COVID restrictions and Plan B. And if you're a minister, you have to support collective responsibility, you have to support decisions of the government, and I couldn't, so that's why I had to leave.
But Boris Johnson is also facing pressure from scientists in a different direction.
Our line in the sand has always been the point at which the NHS can't cope, hasn't it? And I think we're very rapidly going to be approaching that point.
Mel Perry from Stevenage normally has a big family Christmas, but she's worried this year because her dad has a lung condition.
So we're hoping this year that we can do this and carry on. So we're all being very over-cautious. We're not going out now, are we?
She hopes that isolating completely with her 9-year-old twins Otto and Lola will allow them to at least see the grandparents.
We did plan to do a lot, didn't we? We were going to go to, normally go to a Van Hayes shopping centre and see all the Christmas lights and the animals and everything, don't we? And we would go out and visit friends, and there's so much that we can't do this year that we would normally do. And Santa, we've not seen Santa this year.
How much do you want to see your grandparents?
A lot. Quite a lot.
And that is what everyone wants, to see family and friends this Christmas. But that could once again depend on this pandemic. Anushka Astana, News at 10.
Well, one measure of how worried officials are about Omicron was the news tonight that London's traditional New Year's Eve celebration in Trafalgar Square has been cancelled in what Mayor Sadiq Khan called the interests of public safety. Today's figures showed there were more than 90,000 new COVID infections across the UK in the last 24 hours. That's a rise of 60% in the last week. There were 44 deaths recorded of people with COVID, a similar figure to this time last week. And we can talk now to Emily. Emily, there are no new restrictions, but there are still very high case numbers. So the question is, what's behind the government's thinking?
Well, I think it is that at the moment there is still very little evidence to suggest that this new variant is actually going to cause any major problems for hospitals. We simply don't have the data yet about how severe this new variant is going to be. I think ministers will also be looking at the possibility that there's a huge amount of immunity already in this country, either from natural infection or from the vaccine. There is also a sense, I'm getting in some quarters, as well as those in the NHS, that at the moment, there are early signs that the vaccines are holding up against the virus and that hospital admissions at the moment are manageable. There's 7,000 in hospital at the moment with COVID. This time last year, there were 20,000 people in hospital with COVID, so there's a real difference there. On the flip side, the scientists advising the government, as well as some NHS leaders that I've spoken to today, do think that the government should be acting preemptively. They should be acting quickly, because that way it could really blunt the impact on hospitalisations, and the quicker they act, the greater effect they could have on bringing down the peak. That said, there is real concern about London tonight. I think a quarter of hospitalisations in the last 24 hours were in the capital, so people will be watching and waiting there. So there's a legitimate question, I think, to ask tonight. Given the fact there are over 90,000 cases a day at the moment, does the government really want to risk waiting to see how bad it gets?
Emily, thanks very much indeed. Well, that's the science, but again, the politics, because tonight, however, Boris Johnson's message about Omicron has been overshadowed by questions about what he and his Downing Street staff were up to during last year's lockdown. Responding to questions about the leaked cheese and wine photo from the number 10 garden in May last year, the Prime Minister said these were meetings of people at work talking about work. He repeated that twice, in case we didn't get the message.
The weather was fine on the 15th of May last year. People were growing familiar with the rules of the first lockdown, and that afternoon from Downing Street, the then Health Secretary reminded us of them.
You can meet one other person from outside your household in an outdoor public place, but please keep 2 metres apart.
But a short time later, this was the scene just downstairs. The Prime Minister, his future wife and several groups of staff enjoying cheese and wine. Today, Boris Johnson offered a brief explanation.
Those were people at work talking about work.
The Deputy Prime Minister was more fulsome.
It was a work meeting in the garden at Downing Street, and that garden was used to conduct business.
How often do you have cheese and wine at your meetings?
But I don't think I, even in Justice Secretary or as Foreign Secretary, have worked quite in the conditions that the Prime Minister does.
Have you ever had cheese and wine at a meeting in Downing Street?
Not that I can recall, but...
So it didn't. That's why people don't think it looked like a work meeting. There's cheese and wine, and the Prime Minister's wife was there. She's not a member of Downing Street staff, is she?
No, but occasionally Carrie popped in to check in on the Prime Minister.
But this leaked Downing Street video suggests that by December, staff knew meeting for cheese and wine was not OK.
What's the answer?
I don't know. I didn't the party, it was cheese and wine.
Just be clear, it's not. Is cheese and wine all right? No. It was a business meeting.
I'm joking.
This is recorded.
But for those who lost loved ones in the pandemic, none of this is OK. Lisa Gurley's grandmother, Joan, was buried 4 days after the Downing Street photographs.
Knowing that the people that had put these regulations in place didn't follow them or found loopholes around them. You know, I couldn't sit with my dad at my grand's funeral, but they were having wine and calling it work. I just think it's a disgrace, to be honest.
And with the investigation into alleged Christmas parties still underway, the issue of compliance with regulations remains a serious problem for Downing Street. Called in News at 10, Westminster.
And let's return now to Anushka, who's in Downing Street. Anushka, this is a really difficult moment, isn't it, for the Prime Minister? Because on the one hand, there's pressure on him about decisions on restrictions ahead of Christmas, but yet at the same time, he's trying to diffuse this row over parties at Downing Street. So on restrictions first, there's no decision from the Cabinet today, but do you think there will be new guidelines coming?
I think they genuinely haven't made up their mind yet because, as you were hearing from Emily, many ministers think there is a missing piece of data, and that data is around the severity of Omicron. We were expecting some of that today, which was perhaps why it felt like there was going to be an announcement, but it's now been delayed by a day or two. And there are a number of ministers, including the Chancellor Rishi Sunak, who have argued around the Cabinet table, virtual table, that we cannot make big decisions that are going to hurt the economy unless we have that final piece of the jigsaw. Now, there are other people who totally disagree with that. For example, I've just been talking to Professor Lawrence Young at Warwick University, who said, yeah, let's hope for the best, but let's prepare for the worst. He thinks that any delay in action is going to make things worse, and he was hoping there would be specific guidance for how we should behave in England today. There are Cabinet ministers who are more cautious, like Michael Gove and Sajid Javid, but one minister said to me they genuinely haven't made their mind up, but it is quite likely that there will be restrictions after Christmas.
But these are all fundamentally important questions, Anushka, but yet this story about the Downing Street parties just simply will not go away. What's the pressure on the Prime Minister?
I mean, I think that really adds to the pressure, not least because I was hearing it on the doorstep in North Shropshire a week or so ago. Another MP was telling me today in a safe seat as he goes around the constituency. He keeps hearing it. Then we hear from MPs in marginal seats like Christian Wakeford in Bury South, a majority of just 400. He was asked, do you think Boris Johnson will help you keep that majority? And he basically said, not the Boris Johnson of the last 2 weeks. So it adds to pressure on the Prime Minister. And if he has to come back to Parliament for a vote on restrictions, then as one MP said to me, it might drain out that reservoir of goodwill.
OK, Anushka, thank you very much. Outside Downing Street tonight. Well, in Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon was firmly suggesting that there would be no tightening of coronavirus restrictions in the run-up to Christmas. The First Minister is to hold a meeting with her cabinet tomorrow, but reiterated that the advice she gave out last week will, as she put it, take us through Christmas. That means, she said, reducing contacts, staying at home as much as possible, and regular testing. The Queen tonight became one of the many to have their Christmas plans disrupted by COVID. There's no health issue here. The decision is apparently purely precautionary. But the Queen will spend this Christmas at Windsor rather than the time-honoured family trip to Sandringham. Let's talk to Chris about this. Chris, that must have been a very difficult decision for her to make, given this whole last year.
Yes, it was. And we know how much the Queen personally values going to Sandringham. I mean, the last time that she was there was 2019. She couldn't do it last year, of course, because of COVID. And I think, normally the Queen would spend every year there until early February, which is the anniversary of her father's death. So the decision from Buckingham Palace tonight gave some clarity on this issue about what the Queen was doing. And it does raise the question about why the Queen took a decision when there wasn't a similar decision about Christmas gatherings from government. And I know that the Palace was looking very closely at what the government was doing all day. They waited until after Cabinet had finished before they made their announcement. But I'm told the Queen's private secretary informed Downing Street rather than consulted Downing Street. And I think in the Queen's inner circle, the assessment was made with what would it look like if the royal family gathered en masse, as they normally do at Sandringham, at a time when, COVID infections are running away in the way that they are. So, a decision from the Queen today. We didn't get similar clarity for other people when it comes to their Christmas gatherings. Some might say that's the Queen leading by example. The Palace just said it was a precautionary approach.
OK, Chris, thank you very much indeed. Now, under normal circumstances this week, the last opportunity to get the Christmas shopping done would be when the high street looks forward to busy tills and bumper sales. But as we've seen, these are far from normal circumstances. Instead, retailers fear the hoped-for festive boost to business is once again being hit hard by COVID. Footfall figures for the weekend just past are suggesting the Omicron effect is keeping customers away.
If retailers were hoping Santa could deliver a spending frenzy in the days before Christmas, their dreams of a high-flying end to a turbulent year have been dashed by advice to avoid crowded places.
It's normally simple. Christmas shopping is something you either love or you loathe. But this year, there's the added complication of trying to protect both our own health and the shops and businesses we rely on.
I don't feel the Christmas spirit this year. I don't know if it is because of COVID or anything, but this year it doesn't feel the same.
You can't take the mask off, you can't do it really properly, so it puts you off a bit.
I think it's important to consider and stuff, like masks and all that kind of stuff, but, you know, you also can't let it dampen your spirits, right?
Yeah. But it has been a disappointing few days. On Sunday, the number of shoppers was down by a quarter across the UK compared to the same day before the pandemic hit in 2019. Footfall across the whole of last week was 19% lower than the same week 2 years ago. And that's one of the factors hitting hospitality so hard, with a 40% fall in takings across the UK compared to 2019. At this Bristol restaurant, passing trades dried up and many bookings have been cancelled.
We've already had the restrictions earlier in the year, which means we've been open for a lot less time. So, yeah, we were hoping Christmas was going to be another bumper payout for us, and it's just not there.
This pub in London even emptier because hit by staff getting COVID and customers staying at home, they've reluctantly closed until January.
To shut, never mind it being a busy time, I mean, we would never shut out of choice. But if your hand is forced, as in this situation, it really feels like we were left with no other option.
In Watford, the regulars are determined to keep Bloom's Yard coffee shop going, but they'd like the government to do the same.
Last year we had furlough in place and the business rates were frozen for a period of time. None of that's here at this point, so I'm hoping that the government come up with something.
But in the shopping centre outside, it's not all doom and gloom.
Whilst people might be shopping less often, they're certainly on a mission when they're shopping. So actually sales are really very good. And we're certainly getting some excellent sales from our retailers, and some are even saying they're better than 2019.
But with growing concern that new restrictions are coming, it's likely to be a bumpy ride ahead. Rachel Younger, News at 10, Watford.
England's top football clubs were told today that they should try to go ahead with all the festive season fixtures, despite rising COVID infections amongst players. Premier League officials met today after 6 weekend fixtures were called off, but decided against any wholesale postponements. And Dan Rivers is at the Premier League headquarters. Dan, there's been lots of to and fro from different clubs expressing different opinions. Has a preferred different outcome come about?
No, I mean, some of the clubs are really vocal and worried about their ability to field a full-strength side after Christmas, and that's really what prompted this meeting hosted by the Premier League, a virtual meeting today. Now, they needed 14 of the 20 clubs to agree to put off those matches for them to do so. They didn't get that agreement, and so those matches, 9 on Boxing Day, will go ahead, but this is against a backdrop of increasing case numbers among Premier League players and staff. New figures they released this evening show that there are now 90 cases in the last week, up from 42 the week before, so more than doubling. Now, the Premier League is pointing out, well, look, they're increasing the number of players who've received both jabs. That's up to 77% now, but we don't know how many players have also had their booster, which is obviously a critical piece of information. And tonight, the Welsh Government, we understand, is about to make an announcement concerning sporting fixtures. And it may be that puts more pressure on the UK government to follow suit. So it may be whatever they've decided in this building today, it may be overtaken by events.
Okay, Dan at Premier League headquarters, thanks very much indeed. A would-be artist was denounced by his sobbing sister in court today for murdering one of Britain's richest men and maiming his own mother in a ferocious and sustained knife attack. During extraordinary scenes at his sentencing, Thomas Schreiber was jailed for life with a minimum of 36 years.
When armed police smashed their way into a millionaire's mansion in April this year, they were to find the body of one of Britain's richest men. Sir Richard Sutton, a hotelier worth £300 million, had been stabbed several times. His partner, Anne Schreiber, was left paralysed after also being attacked by her own son, Thomas, whom the court was told had been consumed with hatred towards his own family.
This was a tragic and devastating loss of life, taken far too early, of a generous, loving, elderly man who only wanted to enjoy his twilight years.
Before the stabbings, Schreiber had visited his father's grave. It was the anniversary of his death. He'd found living at his stepfather's mansion during lockdown intolerable. Sir Richard had given him £100,000, but Schreiber couldn't stand him, telling friends he also resented his mother.
My mum is a gold-digging. She is a selfish, manipulative, toxic gold-digging.
When Schreiber was arrested after a high-speed police chase, he stabbed himself in the chest, after again messaging friends to tell them what he'd done.
I've let my anger get the best of me, and I've killed my mother, and I've killed her partner, and this is the last you'll ever hear from me, and I'm so sorry. I had to take action.
As he was jailed for at least 36 years, Schreiber apologised in court to his family, saying he'd been a selfish, arrogant coward. But his sister said he'd taken a knife to their world, leaving her mother unable to hold her grandchildren and taking the life of a kind and generous man. Ben Chapman, News at 10.
In a court case across the other side of the Atlantic, lawyers on both sides at the Ghislaine Maxwell sex abuse trial delivered their closing arguments today. The prosecution called her a sophisticated predator, while her defence dismissed the case against her as sensationalism. Now it's time for the jury in New York to make up their minds.
This was the last day of evidence in the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, with final arguments being presented to the jury. For several weeks, the prosecution has sought to inextricably link Maxwell to the predatory activities of the late billionaire financier Jeffrey Epstein. He died in his prison cell in 2019. Maxwell last week refused to take the stand herself, saying there was no need to, since the government had not proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. But today, in her closing argument, Alison Moe for the prosecution said the case was overwhelming, telling jurors, Ghislaine Maxwell was dangerous. She was a grown woman who preyed on vulnerable kids. She targeted a girl whose father had just died. She targeted a girl whose mother was an alcoholic. She caused deep and lasting harm to young girls. It is time to hold her accountable. The proof is in. It's consistent, and it points to only one conclusion: Maxwell is guilty. The prosecution also argued that Epstein and Maxwell were partners in crime, as the assistant US attorney put it, and that Epstein's mansions and their massage rooms were not a space for therapeutic massages, but locations for the sexual abuse of minors. For the defense, Maxwell's lawyer, Laura Menninger, has consistently claimed that the British socialite should not be convicted for the crimes of Epstein. She told jurors today, Ghislaine is being tried here for being with Jeffrey Epstein. Maybe it was the biggest mistake of her life, but it was not a crime. Acquit her. New video was also released today by the court from inside the infamous Epstein mansion in Palm Beach, where so many of his predatory crimes were committed. Now it is an empty shell of a home, with a few reminders on the walls of his relationship with Maxwell. The case is now in the hands of the jury. Deliberations will begin tomorrow, and a verdict is possible before Christmas Day, which will be Ghislaine Maxwell's 60th birthday. Robert Moore, News at 10 in the United States.
Now, you may remember the distressing footage of a woman filmed kicking a horse. The video, which you're about to see again, was posted on social media, and today it was confirmed that the woman involved has been sacked from her job. Sarah Moles, who taught at a primary school in Leicestershire, was initially suspended last month. Mowbray Education Trust, who employed her, has confirmed she's no longer a member of staff. After another debacle in Australia, England's cricketers are facing what already looks like mission impossible, just to salvage some respectability from the Ashes series. Though England did put up a bit more of a fight today, the second test in Adelaide ended, guess what, in another crushing defeat.
So far on this Ashes tour, England's batsmen have shown very little appetite for, well, batting. And so it proved once more in Adelaide. Ollie Pope is one of the tourists' brightest talents, but he failed to shine again here.
Edged, taken, Smith with another catch.
And 5 days before Christmas, Australians thought the English goose was almost done.
I tell you what, if Stokes or Butler get out cheaply here, I reckon you can stick a fork in England. They'll be cooked.
Well, not quite yet. With all the specialist batsmen gone, England's wicketkeeper was determined to offer some resistance. Joss Butler blocked ball after ball in a dogged attempt to guide his team towards a draw. And he did it in partnership with Chris Wokes, a bowler who was showing the batsmen how to do it.
That is a lovely stroke.
He played beautifully for his 44 and was only stopped by an unplayable ball from Jai Richardson.
Oh, too good on that occasion, Jai Richardson.
It was beginning to look like the Aussies were never going to get rid of Butler, but after facing no fewer than 207 deliveries, he got rid of himself.
I think he's gone back and trotted on his stumps.
By stepping, heartbreakingly, on his stumps. It was an innings nonetheless, which a clearly frustrated England captain is hoping his batsmen will use as an example.
That's the determination and the desire that you need to go and win out here. And you know, for our whole batting group, I hope they look at that and we get a good positive response off the back of it.
England were soundly beaten here, and Australia's best bowlers weren't even playing. They'll be back, though, for the next test on Boxing Day. Happy Christmas, Joe. Geraint Vincent, News at 10.
Happy Christmas indeed. Well, finally tonight, when a woman in Kentucky put her 2 infant grandchildren in the bath, this was no fond bedtime ritual. It was to save their lives. And astonishingly, the babies in the bathtub survived even being hurled into the garden by the tornado that smashed through their homes.
329, can you get down here? We need help. We got someone under this debris.
Somewhere amongst this wreckage, they hope, are 2 survivors.
In the bathtub.
We're looking for a 15 months old.
2 babies, one 15 months old, the other 3 months. In the pitch black, officers and volunteers find a bathtub, and inside, what they had been praying for.
Central, can you send us there?
Hey, baby.
Hey, oh my God.
Before the tornado ripped through their home, the boys' grandmother had wrapped them in blankets and put them in the bathtub. Beside them a Bible, a plea for a miracle against the almighty force above.
Next thing I knew, the tub had lifted and it was out of my hands. I couldn't hold on. Oh my God. I was looking everywhere to see where the tub may be. I had no clue at all where these babies was. All I could say is, Lord, please bring my babies back to me safely.
The bathtub was picked up and thrown across the yard. But inside, first Caden.
Oh, it's okay.
There you go.
Good deal. Good deal.
And there behind in the yellow, Dallas. Delivered back into Grandma's arms.
Oh, praise God, Lord Jesus, I love you. Oh, thank you, Jesus.
Nearly 100 people died in the tornadoes that ripped through the Midwest. In the daylight, you can see their might. Nothing left standing. But somehow, a bathtub was enough to ensure this family could be reunited. Sam Holder, News at 10.
Extraordinary story. That's it from me and the rest of the team. Thank you for watching. Good night.